let's go. We are live. Hello, everybody. So we are live. Laura and I are live for our fortnightly Tuesday live with Kelly and Laura. We've never given it a name, but we're here every fortnight and have been for months now, talking about issues within HR, issues within leadership, issues within, not just issues, but sometimes challenges, topics, interesting conversations. So, hey, Laura.
Hello. Yeah, and challenge is a good word. It's the things that people are struggling with and not really talking about. And we're trying to, I guess, just bring light to things that people feel like they're alone with, really, in our community.
Yeah, and that's it, I think, isn't it? It's the unspoken things that we speak about, and we get told that it's been of great use to many people. So this is where we're going to be talking today. And today, I think we've said we're going to try and tackle the conversation of trust. And this isn't just for HR. I think this goes right the way across the organisation. But as always, this stemmed from, so I suppose for those of you that are new, that haven't seen us before, if you are watching us live though, do feel free to say hi, drop us your questions and your comments as we go. But I think for those of you that haven't watched any of these before, hi Sue, or kind of paid any attention. So Laura is over in, although she's not there today, but Laura is based in New York City, and I am in the Cambridgeshire Fens in the UK. And so, but being based from UK and US perspective, actually what Laura and I both always see are similarities that are happening. So whilst we may be thousands of miles apart from one another, we both see the same things. We both recognize the same things. So I'll be like, this is what I'm seeing this week. What are you seeing? And Laura is the same. And this week it's about trust. So Laura, do you want to maybe give us how have we got to this conversation today? Because there were so many things that we could have chosen for today's conversation. Though we were bashing through back and forth, but then you sent me a message and I was like, that is Tuesday's conversation.
Yeah, well, I realized we had never really talked about trust, and it is a hard topic to dissect because the word is like so broad. But basically, one of my clients was sort of sharing with me how she's noticed something with leaders and executives. And I said, wait, explain it to me. And this is what I wrote down, what she said. And I thought it was just the most brilliant line. She said, well, I guess HR is the most trusted department when they need us and least trusted when we need them. And I messaged you that quote and said, a client of mine just said this. Does this resonate? And you said, yes, completely. And we need to think about what that divide is about, why leaders might feel so psychologically safe to sort of share with HR, to ask HR for wisdom and advice, to seek their knowledge.
Yeah.
And yet when HR feels vulnerable to come to them with their own needs and wants, their own team's needs and wants, there can be a guard up.
Yeah.
And so usually we're speaking from the lens of how HR can improve. This is really probably one that's targeted more towards leadership and why they're behaving the way they behave. So yeah, it's meaty. I feel like I don't even really know where to begin. But
no, there's so much in this, isn't there? But just repeat again that we're getting some. I think we're getting lots of other people now. Hi Flo. But just repeat that again in terms of that message to let it sink in, because I think it's definitely one that maybe first time around we're like, yeah, okay, fine, and then you hear it again and it's like, whoa.
So HR is the most trusted department when they need us, and the least trusted department when we need them.
Let that sink in, everybody. Let that sink in. Because for those of us that have been in HR, we will have seen it, we will have heard it, we will have experienced it. And again, I think that's something that we really need to be paying attention to. So I suppose just elaborate a little bit more on that, Laura. That might be a good place to start. In what way did this come up? How did the comment get raised to you?
So I think like she was noticing that the company, including all the leaders, really trust her with whatever questions they have, concerns, when they need advice, when there's an employee relations issue, when there's a performance issue, when there's a creative solution that needs to be found. they are just like soaking up her wisdom, right? But then when she's kind of going in to find out like, hey, I need to hire for my team, or I need training and coaching, or I'm really frustrated with XYZ, there's almost like a wall that goes up. And so some of the behavior we're noticing, and it's not just her, I mean, I'm hearing it across the board, and I know you are too. We're hearing the phrase a lot like, you don't get it. Like it's almost a gaslighting that's happening from executives of like, oh yeah, well, this isn't your expertise now. It's like a shift happens. I just rewatched that movie Gaslight from 1944, I think, with Ingrid Bergman. It was like, oh my gosh, this is kind of what it is. Like, I think leaders are making HR pros feel a little out of sorts when they're coming in with some questions that they're like, you don't really know what you're talking about. You're overstepping. You need to listen to us. It's like a parent figure all of a sudden that comes in. And, you know, you and I have talked about this. It's like nobody likes that parent that's just like, well, it is what it is. That's why I just said so. It's like, and leaders are kind of saying this to HR instead of actually trusting that they can receive the information, they can have a dialogue. So I don't know, it's like on one side of the spectrum, the wall is down, the vulnerability is being shared, and on the other side, the wall comes up.
Yeah, and we've got some comments and stuff coming through. So one is reiterate trust equation. Yes, we can. We'll do that second. Position of HR in an industry. HR is not generating money. HR can be perceived based on experience as not trusty when there's no transparency about decisions. So I think we can start to tackle some of those things. But I think to stick to this point firstly that Laura's making, I think for those of us that have been on the receiving end of that, and I know I have within my career, you know, within different points of my career, I was the most trusted person in some instances within the business. I was having lots and lots of conversations, some off the record, some conversations, many confidential conversations. And I was definitely being asked to add value, to help, to support, to advise, to listen, to be a confidant, all of those types of things. So I definitely had that position. But as you said, if it then gets to, I don't know, wanting to raise something, wanting to get something approved, wanting to have a conversation. Well, you don't really understand the business, Kelly. You don't really understand what's going on here. You don't understand this. You don't understand this. And you don't understand this. So it's almost like you go from this elevated position of being made to feel really trusted to all of a sudden, as you said, that kind of seesaw kind of, you know, and it's, well, you don't really know what you're talking about because you don't understand the business. And it is almost like, I don't know, like you've got to be kind of put back in your place. Like, we need you for this, and therefore we're going to make you feel a certain way. But then actually we don't need you for this because now I need to be the expert. I need to exert my power. I need to be something else. Now, Laura and I were just kind of having a conversation just before we came live, really. I think we've kind of been saying probably we said kind of 5 years, but I think probably since the beginning or kind of the inception of anything to do with people, really, kind of HR, personnel, whatever it is that you want to call it. Flo, don't apologise for the comments. But I think probably since the inception, there has been this understanding HR need to understand the business. As business partners, you need to understand the business. You have to be able to do this. You have to be able to do that. And I think there is, to a certain extent, we absolutely need to be able to understand the business. We absolutely need to be able to speak to our colleagues and relate to our colleagues and understand their challenges, what they might be experiencing, what it is that they might be dealing with. But actually, HR isn't rocket science. And if we are the people experts, it doesn't matter what business you're in, it doesn't matter what sector you're in, you are a people expert. But if this trust is kind of tipping, because maybe the feeling is that we're getting a little bit too big for our boots, or the feeling is that we don't understand our role, or we don't understand where we fit within the business, or any of those sorts of things, maybe that then can be creating a bit of an issue. But the fact that many of us see it so visibly, going from I'm trusting you and now I'm not trusting you, and that can be within the same day, right? That can be within the same meeting. Within the same meeting, that can happen. And yet nobody's questioning it. Nobody's talking about it.
Yeah, it's sort of like I struggle with the HR is not rocket science, although I know how you mean it, because sure, but it is a profession. And
absolutely, it's a very important one. Yeah.
And it is an expertise. And so I think what leaders do is they say that, like, well, I can do HR. I know HR. So when an HR leader comes in to ask for something or to demand something or to request something, the leader might say, yeah, I know what you need and want. I get HR. And so when we've been talking about HR needing to know the business, maybe the business has also been thinking they understand HR, which isn't always true. A CEO may not really understand HR. And I would argue they don't necessarily have to. What they have to do is trust their HR department.
Yeah.
So it's like in all aspects of HR, right? We've talked about this in the past. An HR VP might feel like they understand recruiting. You know, that's not necessarily true, nor do they have to. You just have to trust your recruiting partners know their expertise, and recruiting needs to trust that HR VPs know their expertise. So for all executives who arrogantly say, like, HR is not that hard, I get what they do, that might be the beginning of where the trust is getting eroded.
It is, and as you said, and it doesn't have to be about understanding roles. I think with the way in which we're seeing it from an exec's perspective, it doesn't really have to be about roles or understanding industry. And I was thinking about some examples of this when we said that we would be talking about this. I think for you and I have never met in person. We've had lots of different conversations. We've been communicating a couple of years, maybe. We've been having this, and yet we trust each other. I don't have to have met you. I don't have to know all of the insides and of your life or of who you are, but we have mutual trust and we have mutual respect for one another. A few years ago, I think it was 2018, I was in Uganda on a charity event called HR Connecting HR Africa. That a very good friend of mine, Ian Pettigrew, had started. They'd done a couple of these trips, and he'd started. I think I went along to the second or third one. I hadn't met Ian up until we got to the airport in Dubai, and yet the day later, myself, Ian, and another friend of ours, David, who again we hadn't met until this time, but we met at an airport one day, and the following day we were delivering sessions together. But we trusted, never having met each other in person. We'd done a few kind of online conversations. We'd never met in person, but we trusted that each of us had the skills and capabilities that needed to take place in order for us to deliver this workshop effectively. And at the end of this first workshop that we had delivered, we were asked by one of the participants in the group how many years the three of us had been working together, because the energy was just flowing. And we're like, we started working together like 90 minutes ago. That was the depths of it. We trusted each other. And again, I think a lot of the time we talk about trust being something that's earned. But in some cases, I don't think I couldn't agree with it either. I think, you know, if David, Ian and I would have had to earn each other's trust in order to develop that workshop, there's no way we could have delivered it in the same way, because if we'd have gone into that situation doubting whether we could trust one another, or whether one of us might get, you know, say something that we didn't disagree with, or whether one of us might do something that we couldn't have gone into it like that. We wouldn't have been able to deliver that session with the same level of flow and enthusiasm and passion as we did if we had all gone into it from a perspective of we need to all be earning each other's trust. The fact that we were there, the fact that we had in effect kind of talked about, again, very, very briefly and online, but the fact that we talked about some of our skills and experience previously gave us enough credibility to say I can trust these people. And again, I think it's the same for you and I. Like I trust that if I said to you, Laura, I've got a problem, or can I talk to you about this, or can I share, the same for you, we would just be able to help each other through that. We haven't had to earn that from one another.
I love this. I completely agree. And it's funny, you and I have never talked about this before. I also don't believe you earn trust. And I know that's kind of a controversial opinion. I'm so glad that we agree on that. I wish I could almost come back to you and I first meeting or connecting to say, like, when did we establish trust? I would argue we from the beginning just went in with total vulnerability and took the risk to say, I like you, I want to know you, I think we have a lot in common professionally, let's just share. And then over time, I was just thinking about this the other day, like how, in a way, how weird it is, how many not how many, a few, but I have made a few, like our friendship. I've made a few friends since 2020 where I end the call now like, love you too. And I think I love people that I haven't even met that are literally just in my professional orbit because I've allowed that trust to be there. And I know like Steve Brown has spoken about there's room for love at work. Like and again, it's sort of this weird idea of like, how did you do it? If we had to backtrack it, I don't know. I would argue that we just went in with total vulnerability and openness. And it's funny, I was on a Clubhouse recently and someone asked me in the room, which I thought was such a great question, like, how do you build trust when you're an external recruiter? Because you go in for such a short amount of time. And as an in-house recruiter, it takes me months or sometimes years to build trust with a manager. And I thought, I don't know, I don't have a choice. I'm in the search for 6 weeks to fill it. I go in, we're there to build this incredibly intimate, intense environment where we're talking every day. We're learning together. So I don't know. I guess you could say it starts from assuming positive intent or assuming people are doing the best that they can, assuming that the people you're dealing with know what they're doing, right? Like if an executive trusted that an HR pro is an expert in HR, maybe there wouldn't be that power over and that control.
Yeah.
I really think that's such an interesting point, though, that we shouldn't go in, like you said, go in doubting and then needing to earn trust. We shouldn't go in doubtful of each other. I wanted to bring something up that I think I brought up to you on WhatsApp the other day, and I meant to mention it to you that, okay, so everyone who's watching knows Kelly and I love Brene Brown and her books, and I just reread Rising Strong recently, which was such a great one. And somewhere in her research, she talks about this, that basically, so I'm going to flip this on its head, basically how most of us have a hard time being vulnerable with the other person. So again, think of this in professional terms. We have a hard time being vulnerable, but we're so delighted when that person is vulnerable with us. Then we feel like, oh, okay, she's sharing with me, he's sharing with me, they're sharing with me, maybe now I can let them go first, kind of. So we want others to be vulnerable, but we don't necessarily want to be. But I see it is happening on the opposite end in HR. So leaders want to be vulnerable with HR, but do not want HR to be vulnerable with them. It's like the minute HR shares, they're uncomfortable. They want HR to be guarded, to receive their stressors, to receive their concerns, but they don't actually want to hear HR's stressors and concerns.
Yeah, and that's so interesting, isn't it? Because, that may well be it. You know, I suppose if you...
But why? Like, what is that? Because to me, this feels like a big aha moment.
I think it is that kind of professional boundary thing, isn't it? I suppose if you are... I don't know, like if you went to see, I'm trying to think of like other people professionals, if you like. If you went to see a therapist, if you went to see a doctor, if you went to see a counselor, if you're working with a coach, I suppose if I take that from a coaching angle, if I'm coaching clients, there may be times where I want to be, where it might be useful for me to share experiences or share feelings or share emotions. But actually the premise really of my role is to hold that space, to ask the questions and to get the best out of the person that it is that I'm speaking to. So as a coach, if I'm in that conversation, my coaching client doesn't want to necessarily hear about, I've done this, I've done that, I've done the other, or I felt that too, or any of those sorts of things. Sometimes it can help to share, to build that relationship and to build that rapport. But at 9 times out of 10, that's not my role. That's not what I'm there for. And so again, is it the understanding of this is the role of HR, and therefore I don't need to hear it from you?
Yeah.
Or is it because I am uncomfortable with it? I don't need to know your issues because I've got enough of my own. So is it that kind of, I've got barriers up because I just need you to help me with mine? I haven't got the mental capacity, the physical capacity to take on any of your stuff because I'm dealing with enough of my own. So I'm guarded. I want to stop some of that. But I also, where you said in terms of, you know, sometimes how HR come across, I can remember very, very early on in my career, basically being told, you do not show emotion. I had that drilled into me for years, because whether it's grievance, recruitment, disciplinary, performance meeting, making somebody redundant, having to go through change programs, whatever, for years, I had it drummed into me, you do not show emotion. And I found that really, really hard. I was amazed actually at how quickly I could, you know, kind of turn all of that stuff off. So I had my professional face, if you like, that was my front-facing face. But actually my team saw a completely different side of me, and lots of leaders and managers saw a completely different side of me. But in some meetings, and, you know, this got me names such as, you know, the Iron Lady and the Ice Queen and the Rottweiler. And also, you know, I had all of these names going across the, you know, across the organization, because I was just stone-faced. But actually, from my perspective, that doesn't build trust. If you cannot see me, and if we cannot have that connection in some way, shape or form, I can't build trust with you. But I suppose then that comes back to, and this is something that I know we've spoken about many times, actually, what is the role of HR? Am I really there to build trust and build relationships and do all of that stuff? Or actually within this particular organisation and within this remit, I am there to be the policy police or the administrator or whatever? Does that depend on the definition of what HR are there to do within a particular organisation?
Yeah. This is why the coaching therapist doctor analogy seems good, except that HR pros are employees also. And so they, I mean,
we've spoken about this many times before as well, haven't we? Because in a lot of ways, HR separate themselves when they talk about the business, the managers, the leaders, the people. It's almost as though there is this divide. So here's HR and here is the rest of the business.
Yeah.
We see that a lot as well.
And that's maybe why trust is tricky, because it's like, yeah, one of our listeners just wrote, HR is required to not show emotions. Yeah, maybe that's something we're unlearning. I guess historically, we're also not, I guess this is where it's convoluted, because we're not talking about HR being an emotionally charged department where, you know, yes, in situations of redundancy, of course, you're not going to weep every time you have to make some difficult changes. I guess what we're talking about is literally being able to go into your executive's office and say, this is what my team needs. This is what I need. And having that leader make space for you. Because as you said, Kelly, it's like, that's awkward for them if they expect this person to be like their therapist, their doctor, their coach, even their parent figure, we could argue, right? Then you don't want that person to show vulnerability because it's uncomfortable. You're like, you're not supposed to have needs and wants. You're supposed to just do whatever I need and want. And I mean, this is like where HR becomes so much about psychology. Like, at what point are we saying we're peers, we're equals? And so I'm not a parent figure, authority figure, coach, therapist. Those are part of my, it could be part of your persona. It's just like the dynamic should be that we trust each other. So an executive should be able to hear and make room for HR to share what they need and want. And again, we're not referring to like emotional meltdowns, although that could be part of it in a pandemic. We're also just talking about genuine, like, I need headcount, I need this new technology we need to invest in, I'm going on this conference virtually. These are the 10 things my team needs, and make room for space to talk about it. So yeah, HR people does not have people to represent them, but that's what a leadership team should be doing. The leadership team is there to make HR feel included and not excluded.
Yeah, I know I've seen lots of different posts, and I know I tagged Julie Turney. I think I tagged Laura in something as well the other day. I think I'm starting to see lots and lots of stuff. I think now we're coming out of the back end of the last 12 months. I'm starting to see lots more posts and lots more conversations about who cares about HR, who is the HR for HR, who is the person or the people that are supporting HR. And I absolutely believe internally, really, that needs to be the chief exec. If the people person is reporting into the chief exec, and this is again where we need to have HR reporting into the right place, then that really for me needs to be the chief exec. But I also think this is why it's even more important in many, many cases for HR to have somebody externally to be able to talk some of this through with. Yeah. And whether that is a coach, a mentor, a community, a group, a membership, whatever it is that it needs to be, I think we do need to talk about some of these things, because there are very few, we can't necessarily have the same coffee chats that lots of other people are doing. We can't necessarily have the same conversations over lunch or dinners or, virtually in this world at the moment, just dropping messages to talk about difficult things that we've been dealing with. That does stay in a very, very small unit. So I can see in a lot of cases why there is some of that separation. I totally get that. But I also think we do have to be asking the question, what do we need? Because, and Laura and I have spoken about this, I don't know how many times before, but so many times, because I think we assume this position, and quite rightly, we're kind of given and assume the position of being separate to the rest of the business, sometimes for good reason, sometimes not. But I think sometimes because we assume that, where do we then go? And I think we then start to believe that we can't talk to people, and we can't have the support, and we can't have all of the things that we give to everybody else from across the organization. But we also have to realize that some of this has to start with us saying, hands up, I need some help with this. Yeah. Hands up, I need to be able to speak to somebody. Hands up, I need somebody to listen to me as well. And in 90% of cases, we're not asking for that. We are putting our guard up. We are carrying on as normal. We are assuming that we are separate from the rest of the organization, and it's not doing us any favors. So again, when we come back to the trust and how we can build that and create that, that can make a big difference for us. Who was it? Trust equation, David. So I don't know if it would be useful then. So if we look at this trust equation, so we say, I don't know if I can share on here. I've never done it on here. I don't know if we can work it out. Maybe, I don't know if I can draw it or scribble it. Maybe I'll just talk it through. But basically the trust equation
I'm a drawer, so you can tell me what it is and I will.
Okay, so trust equals credibility plus reliability plus intimacy divided by self-orientation. Laura's always scribbling. Let's see if Laura.
I don't know if my spelling is right. These are some hard words, but.
That's the one, she's got it. So credibility, reliability, intimacy over self-orientation. So basically, credibility.
Okay, I love that.
So the credibility really, it says on here, is really our words, our credentials, our honesty. So I suppose, again, if I go back to that situation that I had with David and Ian in Uganda, the fact that we talked about some of our past experiences, we kind of talked about some of our previous experience. So words and credentials, I suppose. So related to our word, revealed that it was our credentials that built some of that honesty. So we said, based on your experience, I believe you are credible. Yeah.
Yeah, that was true for both of us probably when we met. We were like, oh, we're both business owners. We started our businesses around the same time. We had heard great things about each other. So we already were coming from some credibility.
Yeah, so we've got that credibility. The reliability then relates to our actions and is revealed by keeping our promises. So again, I suppose from you and I's perspective, we have always done what we said we would do. Don't know if I've just frozen or you've just frozen. Are we there? I'm here.
I'm here.
So reliability, yeah. So relates to our actions and is revealed by keeping our promises. So if you say you're going to do something, you do it. And if I say I'm going to do something, I do it. So again, that's strengthening that level of trust that we have for one another. Yeah.
Yeah.
The intimacy then relates to our emotions. So people feeling safe talking about difficult situations.
Yeah.
And again, from what we've just said there, in terms of that level of vulnerability, people want to be able to be vulnerable and talk to HR and all that sort of stuff, but actually they don't want that from HR back.
Yeah, that's where the missing piece is, this intimacy.
But I do wonder if where we say they don't want it, I wonder if they do, well, and I will finish the equation in a minute, but I'll maybe just land this one. I wonder if they do, but they don't necessarily know what it looks like.
Okay, I have a star on intimacy. We'll come back to it.
Right, so we'll come back to that one. And then the self-orientation relates to our caring and is revealed in our focus. So how it's kind of worded in this one, it's kind of us or them. It's that kind of us versus them type situation. But this relates to our caring and is revealed in our focus. So where is our focus? Is it about me, you, us, them? What does that kind of look like?
Yeah, where we orient ourselves, where we place ourselves.
Yeah. So that's that in terms of that. So if we, any questions about that bit or comments?
I want to come back to something that came in the chat, and thank you for all these active comments. We're doing our best to stay on top of them. Just to come back to this trust equation and also to come back to what you said about executives. So someone, I think it was Flo here. Okay, they said, true about executives, but do they know themselves what HR does on a daily basis? Okay, so this feels like something that we need to unlearn, right? So to me, what comes up for me with that question is, you can't build trust unless you know what someone does all day. That you don't understand what the work is that they do, so you don't trust them. Do we need to know what they're doing all day, or can we just trust that they are credible, reliable?
Well, and I think, again, this comes back, so we spoke about this a few weeks ago, didn't we, in terms of, I think it was when we were having our conversation about business partners and the role of business partners. But I genuinely believe that there is a conversation that needs to be happening on a regular basis between HR and the exec team and other leaders across the organisation, but certainly with the exec team, that says, what is it that we need from HR in the organisation?
Yeah.
So we take it away from HR just for 1 second, but I had an interesting conversation with somebody last week. So I had a conversation with somebody last week, and he had been speaking to a CEO within an organisation. And the CEO was talking about development and some stuff that he wanted to spend on for development within some of his teams. And he said that my finance director has told me that I can't have the money. And my friend had kind of said, what do you mean your finance team have told you that you can't have any money? It's, you're the CEO, the FD reports into you. Yeah, but that's the role of finance, right? The role of finance is to say what we can and can't spend our money on. And my friend said, but no, that's I don't see that as the role of HR. So the CEO was quite taken aback and said, as finance, sorry. He said, what do you mean that's not the role of finance? Of course that's the role of finance. And my friend's like, no. The role of finance should be you say what you want to make happen across the business. This is how much it's going to cost. And the finance team are then responsible in finding the money to allow that to happen. Because if it doesn't happen, that's going to be a blocker within the business. And the CEO was like, no, I don't know about that. So anyway, they talked about it and explored. But that was the point that they got to. The role of finance should be about facilitating what needs to happen within the organization from a financial perspective and finding ways to support that financially to make that happen. And the CEO, it took a while for the CEO to get his head around it, but he said whether that was loans or financing or redistributing or whatever, and eventually the CEO got it. But I think sometimes that also needs to be the case for HR, in that if there's something needs to happen within the business, HR can sometimes be seen as a blocker. And I think sometimes this does impact the way in which people feel they can or can't trust us. And sometimes we need to look at how we can facilitate some of these things to happen instead of being a blocker. So coming back to, do we need to know what HR do on a daily basis? I don't think so, no. But we do need to define what the role of HR is within the business.
Sure. Exactly. But it's not HR's job to endlessly report to the CEO about everything they're doing on a day-to-day basis, because that creates
I just need to trust that you are doing what it is that I need you to do. Yeah. I need to trust that you will come to me with what I need to know. Exactly. And I need to trust that you will deal with what I don't need to.
Exactly. So Jesse's asking, what's the quote for my client again? So let me show you. I have it written down in case you're visual like me. So HR is the most trusted department when they need us, and the least trusted department when we need them. So the idea is that the executives trust HR when they have a need or a want, but when HR has a need or a want, there is a lack of trust. And that's something we're really trying to dissect here. And then we just kind of talked through a little bit about the trust equation, which I had never seen before. So I'm glad Kelly explained it. Credibility plus reliability plus intimacy over self-orientation. So we're just trying to navigate, again, it doesn't all sit on HR's shoulders, but how executives can maybe feel more trusting. So Kelly, we wanted to circle back on intimacy on this equation, because you said, I wonder if, it's not that leaders don't want HR to be vulnerable with them or intimate with them. They actually don't know what it could look like. They're not used to it. It's an unlearning. They're used to HR maybe being guarded and robotic, or as we've seen in the comments, being trained not to show emotion. And now 2021 HR has a voice, thankfully, has needs and wants, and they're saying them. So you're saying there's probably a disconnect between what executives are even expecting. They don't really know how that dynamic can be.
Yeah, I just think, I don't necessarily know how to word it, but I think if I think back to some parts of my career, and if I think back to, some of my coaching clients, some of the conversations that we've had, some of the things that have come up in conversation, a lot of the time we hear, I went to speak to HR about this and they just showed me a policy. I went to speak to HR about this and they didn't listen. I went to speak to HR about this and they didn't do something that I wanted them to do. And so we say, a lot of people will say, that's not what I want from HR. I want to feel heard. And we know sometimes in order to feel heard, it is that, it is that building the relationships. It is about that vulnerability. It's about that curiosity. It's about being courageous. It's about being brave. It's about all of those things that we've talked about so far.
Yep.
But actually, if I start to, I suppose, be more human, if I start to be a bit more personable, if I start to go into a bit more of a coaching role, and I start to ask you to give me a little bit more detail, or I start to talk to you about what it is that you want the outcomes to be, or I start to share, or actually I had a similar experience with this, or I felt a similar way to you before, or I felt this, or we could potentially try this. If we start to go down a different route with it, are people comfortable with us doing that?
Yeah, it's like in any relationship, once you set boundaries or create a new dance, as Harriet Lerner's research shows, like the minute you start to kind of create a new dance in any kind of business relationship, people are bound to be uncomfortable. So that might be exactly what's happening right now.
Yeah.
HR is changing fast, and leadership is kind of confused by these new dynamics.
Well, actually, I don't want you to do any of those things.
Yeah.
I just want you to show me the policy and tell me what I can or can't do, even though that's the thing that we've been saying for 20 years. I don't want you to do that. I want you to be more personable. I want you to be more human. I want you to be more vulnerable. I want you to not be so robotic. And yet, actually, you know, and again, going back to that quote, what that quote is telling us, actually, I do want the robot. I don't want the vulnerability. I don't want the personal side. I just want you to be the robot that says, do this, do that, do the other. I don't want you to be a person. And so again, I wonder, and again, this may come down to what's the expectation of HR within a particular organization.
Yeah.
What do I want as a person? How comfortable am I as a person?
You know, like,
I know, there's so much to cover.
Well, and also, we don't want them to be a robot, but we're scared of it being different than we expect. So I often talk about in recruiting, this is also a new concept. So we talk a lot about candidate experience. We all agree and are comfortable with this idea that candidates need a good experience. What we're not comfortable with is that a recruiter, again, corporate recruiter, is also entitled to a good experience. So I call it recruiter experience. So a hiring manager will say, what are you talking about? I'm like, well, you're dumping 40 requisitions on your internal recruiter's plate. They're overwhelmed, understaffed, underpaid. They are under-resourced with technology. So they're having a horrendous experience. And what are you doing to accommodate that? And they're like, eek, we're only now comfortable with the candidates having a good experience. We definitely aren't comfortable with this other party we need to think about. Yeah. And so it's like, to your point, do they want their internal recruiting team to be robots? They say no. They say they want a partner and an advisor and a counselor and a coach and a consultant and a partner, right? But then when that dynamic starts to reveal itself, there's a lot of discomfort. And I would say, like, let's just work through the discomfort. These are growing pains. It's like, if you want HR to be a leader in your organization, then it's going to be uncomfortable for you maybe when they come in your office with some demands, because that's what leaders do. You just have never seen it done before.
Yeah. And we've spoken about this, haven't we, in terms of my experience. I think we've touched on this a few times, but I know when I went into the organization where I went in as HRD, and I'd been headhunted, I'd been approached for this position based on lots of things that I'd done previously. So the fact that I was doing things differently, I was burning handbooks, I was scrapping performance appraisals, I was having conversations that needed to be had, I was doing all of this stuff, and it was right, okay, so that's who we want for this organization. So we're going to get her in, we're going to do this. This is exactly what it is that we want. And yet, as I started doing it, that's not what we want. We want you to follow this process and follow this framework and do all of these things. And it's like, no, because that's not what I do. That's not what I was brought in for.
Yeah.
This is what we said we were going to do.
So we need to change the conversation. Like, you know, Brene talks about certain language. Anyone who's not listening to her Dare to Lead podcast on Spotify, she talks a lot about this.
Yeah, listen to it.
Like how to, so in a meeting, maybe saying things like, so the story I'm telling myself is, right? The story I'm telling myself is that HR doesn't typically have needs or wants. This is new for me. Yeah. Or I am rumbling with this idea that I'm uncomfortable right now. Or this is awkward for me to say, or this is difficult for me to share, or this is difficult for me to hear, right? We have to kind of let that commentary be completely commonplace at work. Because it's okay if an executive has never had an HR person be a strategic partner, and it's okay if that's uncomfortable. But how often are they saying it? So you probably, in those years of burning handbooks, Kelly, never had a leader come to you to say, I really admire this progressive work you're doing. I'm really uncomfortable with it. Can you bear with me and help me through my own discomfort with this transition? Had you heard that, you could have bridged more intimacy and probably gotten to the progress.
Yeah. And it's always been a yes or no. And again, I think I have always tried my hardest to ensure that I have those relationships, to ensure that, again, with all of that equation from a credibility, reliability, intimacy perspective, I have always, I suppose, maybe not consciously, but subconsciously, for me, that's how you build relationships. That's how you go about creating all of those sorts of things. And I suppose I've always been to the point of being open, but again, I think some people, when they put their guards up, when they're not ready to have that type of conversation that says, I am feeling uncomfortable with this, it can be very difficult sometimes then to break those walls down. And again, I think for a lot of us that have been in that HR space, we get told yes or no, or we get told go ahead with it now, or go ahead with it in 6 months, or we get told we'll come back to this later. And again, we've spoken about this so many times before, but where we talk about our level of curiosity, like I do then want to know, why not now? Why in 6 months? What's going to be different? What can we do to get it across the line? What's the barrier? How, my curiosity genuinely wants to know that, because I want to get to the root of it. But again, if you are met with an exec team or any leader, any person across the organization that just puts guards up, that is, I've said no, we're not talking about it, we'll come back to it in 6 months' time, sometimes there's very little you can do about it. Very little you can do about it.
But it's up to the leader to be able to say, like, I think you're right. I think most HR pros that we know are pretty good about saying, this is uncomfortable for me to bring up, or this is a hard thing for me to ask for. Yeah. Like, we can show that intimacy in a conversation to build trust. But executives probably are not as good at it, because let's be real, they're probably mostly a demographic that's been taught to be strong and forceful and not particularly emotive. But what if we could help them get there where an executive can say, like, oh, this is a little uncomfortable for me that you're doing this modern, progressive, forward-thinking thing, or gosh, this request is unusual for me to hear from HR. I'm sorry, I'm looking a little shocked right now. I'm trying to just reconcile what you're coming to me with. Like, so if any executives are watching this, I guess what we're trying to say is your discomfort is completely okay. It's just maybe addressing it instead of doing like total block from it, right? Because you're uncomfortable, so now your armor is up. What if you're uncomfortable and just say, I'm uncomfortable?
Yeah. And interesting that you, so I cannot remember the exact words, but you mentioned Brene Brown, and I had the absolute privilege when she was in London. I'm going to say 2015. When she was in London in 2015, she did a half-day kind of breakfast session on the Thursday and a full-day workshop in London on the Friday. I went to it, sat in the audience, watched her speak. Absolutely incredible. And one of the early stories, we all know that she's, an incredible storyteller, and everything she tells has a story attached to it. But one of the things that she did say in first thing in the morning was that as part of her visit to London, she had been asked to go and deliver a bit of a talk, deliver a bit of a workshop to a senior executive team for one of the banks in the city. And she had gone in as Brene Brown with her clogs and her jeans and her jacket, because that's how she shows up. You get her as you get her. She rocked up, she walked into this room, big, massive boardroom table. Some of them, I think back to it now, but I can't imagine anybody saying, I don't really know who Brene Brown is. But 2015, and I think half the room were like, who is this woman? So she'd walked in, introduced herself, and said that she was there to talk about shame and vulnerability. To which point she said, half of this kind of table had sort of sat, crossed their arms, like, we don't need that. She was knackered. She realised that as part of this workshop and as part of this trip, she was going to be knackered on her way home. And she said, so I was like, if you don't want me here, I can go. And was about to leave the room, and then got called back in because one of the leaders said how important it was that we talk about this conversation. And I think, and I suppose the reason I'm raising that, I think a lot of us, in a lot of instances, are prepared to let those types of conversations walk out of the room.
Yeah.
I think sometimes when we are prepared to let those types of conversations walk out of the room, we've missed the opportunity to have them. Had that room of people had let Brene Brown walk out of the room that day, they would probably never ever have got her back in that room. They would never have had her wisdom and everything that it is that she has to share. And yet all of the ones that, just sort of crossed their arms, I'm not bothered, we don't need any of that, were prepared to let her do just that. And I think a lot of the times we as people, whether we're leaders, HR people, managers, people within the organization, a lot of the time we are letting these types of conversations walk out the door and then thinking, oh, I wish I'd have said that. I should have been more open. I should have been more vulnerable. I should have been more honest. I should have been more open. I should have been more trusting. And yet we're letting them walk out and then we're not picking them back up again later.
Yeah. Well, this is why HR people resign, and then executives are like, I'm shocked they left. I'm like, well, you never made room to hear their story, to heed their request, to listen to them. You just shut it down. You weren't willing to let them be vulnerable with you. So we have 10 minutes left, which means we need to practice what we preach. So I want to ask you, you've got some exciting stuff I've been seeing on Instagram about a new...
Should I quickly just come back? Well, I will come back to that. I know you're going to say you get uncomfortable, but let's come back. So I've got a couple more comments on here first. So can I please repeat self-orientation? So yes, so self-orientation is the bit where basically, where are your interests focused? So are you focusing on your interests or their interests? So are you kind of self-focused or focused on other people? Does that make sense properly? So it's almost the kind of, who does that person care about in that situation or in that relationship or any of that sort of stuff? Do they care more about themselves or do they care more about the person?
Yeah, to me, it means that you have kind of low ego needs. Your ego is not going above your desire for credibility and intimacy. You're not like trying to just like, your ego is not driving the trust.
Yeah. Reliability. And I think, is that probably it then in terms of the questions?
Yeah.
Mutual communications. Let's just pick up very briefly on this bottom one then. So it's all about mutual communication skills, which it says are not easy. And again, Laura and I bang on about this all the time. I am absolutely sick to the back teeth of being told that communication skills are a soft skill. I am sick and tired of hearing that many of the vitally important skills that we have are being called soft skills. The things that we call soft skills, there's nothing soft about them. They are some of the hardest to learn and some of the hardest to master. And I suppose I just want to kind of end on that mini rant, really. Because we know we talk about that all the time.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I had a clubhouse the other day with this amazing guy named Alan Allard that I recommend we follow on Twitter. And he is basically a former psych therapist, and now he's a corporate coach. Mm-hmm. And I had him join me on Clubhouse to talk about like the psychology that shows up for leaders. And you could see the room was so full to start with, and within like 10 minutes people were leaving, and we both laughed and said, it's funny how the minute you start talking about the psychology of human beings at work, the psyche that we bring, the ego that we bring, people don't want to hear about it, but it's really the work that makes us so much better, especially in the people profession. So I said to Alan, like, you know, this is business talk. And he's like, oh, it's so true. Like they just wanted to come and hear about profit and loss statements and whatever, assets and investments, and not hear about humanity. But it's like,
there's so much stuff out there. I mean, you'll know, I think psychology and neuroscience, like they're the two topics I can geek out on all day, every day, because I do just find it really fascinating how we can attach to certain things, how we can change different things, how we can think certain ways, how our behavior. I mean, there's so much stuff on this now, isn't there? I think even just earlier, I think it was Matt Phelan from the Happiness Index. Again, I'm a big fan of the stuff that the Happiness Index guys do, but he's put, I think it was a higher, I literally just saw it once. So apologies, Matt, if you're watching and I get this wrong, but I think it was something about like the hierarchy of like engagement and feelings. And it's this kind of difference between what our heart, like a heart and head. So it's kind of a hierarchy, but at the top of it is kind of a head-heart kind of rationale. And actually you need to be engaging both the head and the heart in order to find a balance of engagement and happiness at work. That's my interpretation of it. That may be completely wrong, but I think if we ignore either or of those, we miss so much of it.
Yeah.
And yet some of us don't want to focus on the brain, and some of us don't want to focus on the heart either. And I think if you're not focusing on any of those, you've missed the point completely.
Right. We're whole human beings with all of that. So now can you take 2 minutes to tell us what's going on your side?
Yeah. Well, some of it I'm not going to be saying anything about until next Tuesday. But yeah, so I think I had just some light bulb moments, I think, a few weeks ago. So I have been working with an amazing group of women, actually. So I've been working with a fabulous woman called Fiona Scott, who's been helping me with some more of my PR stuff. And I have been, I'm working with a new photographer in a few weeks, Rosie Parsons, to get some lovely new photographs taken. And I started working with a wonderful woman called Kaylee Lloyd on some brand stuff. So I just thought my brand needs a little bit of change, a little bit of freshening up, a bit more of my personality injected into it. And so I thought I'll have a little bit of a change. And then, of course, started to answer as part of this brand building, who are your clients? Who do you work with? Who do you love working with? All of these sorts of things. And of course, immediately I was like, well, I work with HR people. But realised there was so much more to the clients in which I'm working with. So there will be some exciting new announcements next week. There is a totally new look. But yeah, in addition to that, I had a conversation with one person that you and I both know and a couple of other people a few weeks ago who were talking about their coaching and the packages and services that they provide to HR professionals. And immediately I could see, well, this is what you need to do, and this is what you need to change, this is how you need to package it, and this is how you get it all successful. And then sat down on the following Monday to realise I have changed nothing for any of that for me for about 4 years. So next week is going to be some big changes. I'm doing lots of countdowns. There are lots, so I'm kind of, I suppose I'm clue dropping.
Yes, I see it on Instagram. I get very excited by all the drama and suspense.
So yeah, and then everything will be coming out on Tuesday. So I've got some really exciting new packages and some exciting new programs, some different ways that people can work with me one-to-one, and some different ways that people can work with me in groups, and some online stuff. So
we can discuss it in 2 weeks' time. By then it'll all be visible.
And it'll be live, it'll be visible, and it'll be beautiful. Yes. But yeah, keep an eye out on Instagram, because it's gonna be a lovely image when it's finished.
I'm excited.
But thank you for asking.
Yes,
no, anyone
who's following Kelly on Instagram has seen some hints. So I wasn't sure if we were going to get a sneak preview, but we'll wait till next week, and then we'll see what's going on in June. Very exciting.
Yeah, but thank you for asking.
Of course. Our updates are just as important as everybody else's.
They are. But yeah, all good fun.
Thank you for all the comments, everyone. This was a really active chat today, and
there's a lot to keep up with, but thank you.
Yeah, no, we did a pretty good job, and I appreciate the kind of questions and comments. And again, these videos are always up on Kelly's YouTube and mine, and so you're always more than welcome to comment after the fact, because sometimes we have big thoughts that come, 2 days later.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, thank you everybody for watching. It's been an absolute pleasure. So yeah, Laura and I will be back 2 weeks' time. No doubt Laura and I will pick another topic just off the back of some things that we've seen. But if any of you, we say this all the time, occasionally we get some suggestions, but if there is a particular topic that you would like us to be talking about, or particular questions that you have, then Laura and I are more than happy to tackle those for you during the live, get them answered for you, and really give you as much value as you can possibly get out of us in an hour.
Don't forget to follow Kelly at Coaching People Leaders on Instagram, and I'm at Eastside Staff on Twitter and Instagram. Of course, we're on LinkedIn, where you are right now, and we'll talk to you all in 2 weeks' time.
Indeed. And what's your Instagram? What's your YouTube?
YouTube is Learn with Laura HR.
Perfect. So you can pretty much find us anywhere. I think both of us, Laura's much more active on Twitter. I'm much more active on LinkedIn. But I think we're pretty much everywhere between the two of us. But yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for all of your comments and questions. And I hope we've been able to map all of that out for you. I hope you found today interesting. And we will see all of you in 2 weeks' time.
You too.
Take care. Bye, everybody.